Speaking of congressional testimony, Kristi Noem had a rough one on Capitol Hill yesterday. Let's move on to talk about her appearance, her testimony. We have a clip that we should start off with of her getting grilled by Representative Underwood. Let's go ahead and roll a B1 here.
It is also violating the fundamental right of individuals. Do you believe that the Constitution grants everyone in our country the right to due process, including non-citizens?
The administration has the authority to.
Ma'am, I'm looking for a yes or no question. Yes or no. Do you believe the Constitution? Yes, ma'am. Do you,
we have not conducted
reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. Time is yours. Okay. Secretary Noem, I'm just looking for a yes or no here. Do you believe the Constitution guarantees due process to everyone in America?
Due process is exactly what this Congress lays out.
Yes or no? Okay, ma'am, I'll take that as a no.
On due process
excuse me, I'm trying to ascertain your understanding of the law as it applies to your department. And you as its leader should be able to give us a yes or no answer because judge after judge has ruled that the law is not being followed. Do you believe that the U.S. government has the authority to deport American citizens?
No, and we are not deporting U.S. citizens.
I'm so happy to hear that you do not believe that the law gives you that authority because the federal government has no authority under U.S. laws to deport any American citizen. And as I know, everyone viewing this hearing today knows that several American citizens have been deported to date. Secretary Noem, that was not a question. Secretary Noem.
So Noem just said that was not true. Did you catch that at the end, Krystal?
Yes. Yeah. And that's just a lie.
Here's my theory. I don't know if she's in the loop on that. And that may sound ridiculous, but I think Kristi Noem at Homeland Security is very, and ridiculous, by the way, it definitely is if that's the case. But I don't think it's implausible because I believe her role is seen as one where she's like a public ambassador for the Homeland Security brand, which is why all of those.
Which is why she plays dress up with all her, like, you know, her ice flak jacket and whatever. Yeah.
Yep. And spends a lot of
pointing guns at people's heads while she's doing her photo ops. Yeah.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Yeah. She and spends so much time in front of media. So I genuinely do wonder to what extent she is aware of what's happened. If you have advisors that are insulating you, by the way, that is not an excuse either. That's the furthest thing from an excuse. That's actually criticism if you're not aware of those types of things. But if you have advisors that are insulating you from a lot of negative media pushback, those things actually can happen, unbelievable as it may sound.
Well, I think the next soundbite we have would suggest that she does know at least some of these details. It's just that she thinks because the U.S. citizens were children who they deported with their undocumented immigrant mothers, that doesn't count. Yeah. And I mean, it is the Trump administration's unconstitutional legal position that birthright citizenship has been ended. So, you know, it could also be that in their minds, even though, again, this is like brazenly unconstitutional, that if you had a child while you were here, that doesn't really count the same as a U.S. citizen. But, you know, on the due process point, that the one other point I'll make about the Lauren Underwood clip that was noteworthy to me before we move on to the next piece is Lauren Underwood is like this is moderate. She's like a moderate. She's not a progressive. She's a sort of like moderate, represents a suburban part of, I think, outside of Chicago. I think I'm remembering that correctly. In any case, Democrats clearly feel a lot more confident on the issue of immigration, especially now that they can point to these due process issues, the, you know, abuses against American citizens. And they seem to have been somewhat persuaded by the significant polling drop that Trump has suffered on these specific cases of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and what he's doing with El Salvador, and more broadly, the way that his approval rating on immigration has really sunk and he's now underwater. They seem to be much more comfortable and much more emboldened. And I think that's also, you know, the Lauren Underwood exchange to me was emblematic of that as well.
Yeah, so the Underwood exchange was being passed around a lot by the left. Let's now roll this next clip, which has been passed around a lot by the right. We can take a look at it here.
3 children so far, likely more children. One of those children with cancer who was deported without the medication necessary to address that child's cancer. Again, a U.S. citizen. The lawyers have said that they were not given, the family was not given an opportunity to make plans for the kids.
When these, the specific cases that you're referencing with these children, it was the parents' choice to take their children with them.
Did ICE
Which it is the
follow
policy of
through
the
on the
Trump
policy?
administration to keep families together.
Ma'am,
That is what we have
ma'am,
continued
reclaiming
to
my
do,
time.
is that
Okay, so Krystal, I think your theory has prevailed here that she's aware of these cases of U.S. citizen deportations, which, as far as I can tell, actually have involved children. That was the case of a 10-year-old girl with cancer who was getting treatment in the United States. Her family is non-citizen. They were coming back to get cancer treatments and were actually ultimately ended up being deported, as you heard Representative Escobar say there. A lot of these other children were really young. We're talking like toddlers. So the idea of them not being deported, the way some of the early media reports covered this, I think was genuinely misleading. So I get why the right is passing this clip around. But at the same time, there is this gray area where, as you say, they sort of have declared the end of birthright citizenship. Now Kristi Noem is saying it's their policy to keep families together. It's one of those like very weird circumstances for the administration to have to deal with and then go out and defend publicly, because they're not wrong that it would be like the crueler thing. If the parents want their children to come with them and the children are U.S. citizens, the much crueler thing would be to leave them in a detention center in the United States rather than being with their mothers. On the other hand, you then end up technically deporting U.S. citizens, but obviously at the request of their own families.
Well, at least in one of these instances, mom was being deported, dad was staying here. Dad and they were engaged in dad was trying to keep custody of the child in the United States. And a judge said that the family was not given any sort of, ability to contest this deportation of the child. So it, really did go against the wishes, at least of one of the parents. And I mean, it's consistent with the way that they've executed the entire immigration policy, which is they just do what they want and they don't care about due process, even when you're talking about children who are U.S. citizens. And of course, the instance that she brings up there of a child who has cancer, who's receiving treatment here, is just outrageous to not make provision for that child's care and make sure that they're going to be okay as this process unfolds, et cetera. So I don't know. I don't really get why the right thought that this made Kristi Noem look good when you actually know the details of these situations, because obviously it is complex when you have a mom who is undocumented, a child who is a U.S. citizen. In many instances, mom probably would want to take the child, but not in all instances. And that's really what, we've seen play out with some of these cases. One other thing I wanted to point out that just is breaking as well is Marco Rubio had made this comment about how they want to expand their deportation into prison policy beyond just El Salvador. And we now have some reporting that they are going to start deporting immigrants likely this week to Libya's prison system. Another one that is notorious for sexual abuse and torture and horrific conditions. Some have described it as, quote unquote, a hellhole. So that appears to be, and of course, Libya itself is a war-torn country, in large part thanks to our own foreign policy there, partially ruled by effectively a warlord. It's, in any case, that appears to be the next place that they want to be able to ship immigrants to another prison system that is rife with horror and human rights abuses.
Yeah, and I wanted to put, definitely we'll be following that story if it develops or if it was something that was like randomly tossed out there. Sounds like it was a fairly serious proposal, so we'll obviously bring everyone updates on that. I wanted to get this next element B3 on the screen. Yoan Grillo has a great Substack. He reports from Mexico City, and I wanted to point out he has some updates from what Claudia Sheinbaum discussed at her Monday morning news conference. I know, Krystal, you and Glenn covered this on Monday. Sheinbaum gave her own description of the conversation she had with Donald Trump about troops. This is from Yoan, I'm quoting him. Trump said, "We want to help Mexico," and this is from Sheinbaum now. Trump said, "We want to help Mexico, and to help Mexico, we want to send troops if you need them." And I said, "No, President Trump, not this. We want to collaborate in many ways in line with our sovereignty and in the territory that each of us governs. And the reason that's worth mentioning here, and Yoan, as somebody who follows this really closely, mentions that Sheinbaum has rapidly changed the tone on migration, like crackdowns, since Lopez Obrador left office. The reason that this is worth highlighting is because Trump desperately needs Sheinbaum's cooperation, obviously, to continue with a lot of these crackdown type policies, which is why we saw the administration roll out this $1,000 self-deportation policy, because they know that these deportations are way more difficult. They've realized that these deportations are are not happening at a pace that are going to allow them to do the, quote, mass deportations that they promised on the campaign trail. So everyone probably is aware that DHS announced this week you can, via CBP Home, if you are a non-citizen, you can deport yourself and get a $1,000 voucher, which actually is cheaper than the legal process playing out per capita in the United States. But I wanted to bring up this post from Ruben Gallego. This is before. He responded to that and said, why don't we make them pay a $5,000 fine, go through a background check, and give them a work visa for a few years, renewable with good behavior. Noteworthy, Krystal, because I think, Dems have definitely staked out a hard opposition to these Trump policies, but I sort of feel like there haven't been a ton of alternatives proposed. It's sort of like you're either Laken Riley or open borders. You're either on the Laken Riley Act, I should say, signing it with like a lot of kind of centrist Dems did with Republicans, or you're just like all in favor of opening up the borders, which, more power to maybe you and Ryan, but I don't think you're as far as Ryan on that camp. But,
I'm getting there. I'm getting more radicalized every day, Emily.
But this is
Trump,
an interesting alternative.
Trump is the one who articulately points out, hey, these borders are just arbitrary lines drawn on a map. Like, what are we doing here?
Spot the lie.
Random line drawn on the map. Why do we care? No, I mean, listen, Gallego, who did vote for the Laken Riley Act, by the way, Democrats tried to, in the last administration, stake out this hawkish border position through their bipartisan immigration bill. But I think you're right that at this point, none of them are open borders. That's just, there's none of them that are open borders, actually. But I think that anybody who is, even slightly progressive, they're happy to attack the Trump administration, but I don't know that they've landed yet on where they want to specifically be. And I think that'll be fleshed out a lot probably in the next presidential election is when we'll see more specifics about what that plan actually looks like. I mean, to speak to the Trump self-deportation piece, this is their major program is effectively sadism and cruelty on display, symbolic displays of cruelty, like sending to El Salvador, sending to Libya, et cetera, deporting the child with cancer, plus self-deportation. Mm-hmm. That's their true policy, their actual policy. And so, that's where the $1,000 to self-deport comes in. By the way, I want to note, they try to make it seem like this is a great deal for immigrants and, then you'll have a better shot to come back in. In many instances, that is not the case. And in many instances, you will lose out on if you have, for example, like an actually legitimate asylum claim that has a shot or some other potential for relief, you would lose out on that by availing yourself of this program. I don't think Ruben Gallego's, I guess I like Ruben Gallego's idea better than that, but it's still not a great idea because, I mean, first of all, when you're just, okay, well, who can pay $5,000, then you get to jump the line. Not crazy about that from a class perspective. Not crazy about you get a work visa based on quote unquote good behavior, because what does that do? That hands tons of power to, it's like the H-1B program. It hands tons of power to capitalists and the boss class and does fuel a sort of exploited underclass. So I'm not crazy about his solution either. that is being offered as an alternative here, I think also has some major issues.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is that there's really no good solution to what happened over the course of the last several years. And obviously, we all disagree on what the scope of the quote unquote solution should be. But, when you have so much immigration in such a short time span, obviously, there's a need for like some type of government grappling with that, or some type of like significant government policy to address what happened. And by the way, that's for American citizens, but also for the migrants who end up living these such precarious existences. Like when we were talking earlier about the little girls who were deported, U.S. citizens who were deported. I mean, it's just, it's not fun for them. It's not fun for the parents. It's a mess because of all of these big legal questions. And Gallego's $5,000, one of the reasons that concerns me, to be honest, is that a lot of these migrants are already in debt to smugglers. And the smugglers are working for the cartels. And so that's basically would be like a massive cartel subsidy, or be a massive like wealth transfer to the cartels that we're currently trying to help Mexico undercut. And Mexico is currently trying to undercut, at least if you believe top figures in the government, that they're trying to go after these cartels and break apart the cartels because they've wreaked havoc on the lives of ordinary Mexicans. So I think there are a lot of problems with the solution. I do, though, think it's, I wonder, actually, the fact that he voted for the Laken Riley Act and got probably a lot of flack from the left. I mean, I imagine in Arizona it wasn't that bad, although there's a pretty robust migrant advocacy movement in Arizona. But I wonder if that actually pushed him to come up with like some type of answer, a policy answer to this. Because
I think that's possible, because I think he is considering running for president in 2028.
Yep.
And I think the Laken Riley Act is going to be pretty damn well near disqualifying for him in that race. Given the way that the Democratic base has, once again shifted on immigration and is appalled. And it's not just about the substance of that bill. It's also about your first instinct when Trump 2.0 came in was to capitulate. And that is, for the Democratic base right now, that is the ultimate sin. And that you did it on, an issue that has become very central and very animating for the Democratic base, I think is a huge problem for him. And I think he's savvy enough to realize that.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.